Okay, hello everyone. I'm gonna kick it off. My name is Nilufar Tabande, and I have the honor to welcome you to today's sessional or seminar series, Current Topics in Visual and Circadian Neuroscience. A quick note before we start, if you have any questions during the presentation, please feel free to add them to the chat or the Q&A section. Then we are going to discuss them later. Okay, then now let me introduce today's speaker, Dr. Pauline Kang from the University of New South Wales, Sydney. Thank you, Pauline, for joining us, and we are looking forward to hearing your fantastic presentation. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much. I will just share my screen. Can you see the presentation? Okay, yeah, amazing. Please. Thank you. All right, so thank you so much for the kind invitation to speak to you all today. So today I'm going to be talking about the impact of visual behavior and light exposure on childhood eye growth. Last presentation a couple of weeks ago by Dr. Lisa Ostrom, she's talked about more sort of the basic science, foundational sort of aspect about light exposure and eye growth, discussing a lot about potential mechanisms, within the eye that might be causing some of the eye growth related changes that we are seeing. But today what I wanted to do was to put a little bit more of a clinical spin to it. So extending from her presentation, just to explain to you about some of the clinical implications of the research that has been done and our understanding of what a child sees and the type of light exposure that they receive, how that impacts their overall eye growth. So I'm sort of across the world in a place called Australia, and we've got the iconic Harbour Bridge and the Opera House. And we in Australia are known for its beautiful beaches. We've got a very, our culture during summers, always going out to the beaches, spending a lot of time outdoors. We are also known for our outdoor activity. A lot of our children within schools have spent a lot of time outside playing sports. And one of the most popular sports in Australia is called AFL or rugby union, and it's where you've got a ball and you sort of I don't play it or know too well myself, but essentially it's a type of football sort of game, which doesn't it's more involving passing, a little bit of kicking, but I guess in Australia we're very into our sports and outdoor time. However, I guess comparing to lots of different parts of the world, one thing that we do definitely have in common is that there is an increasing amount of children using devices. So what I wanted to talk to you today about was about eye growth, specifically more short-sightedness and myopia, which is increasing in prevalence all over the world, including Australia, and to talk to you about some of the clinical research that have been conducted on various interventions which we prescribe to our children in the hopes of slowing down their myopia progression. So as I mentioned before, this is going to be more an extension from the presentation from Dr. Lisa Ostrom, where she talked about more sort of the basic science element, and I'm just going to be putting more of a clinical spin about the consequences of light exposure, visual experience and eye growth. So to start off with, I just wanted to introduce you to emmetropization. So emmetropization is a dynamic process of eye growth during childhood. So especially during the first couple of years of life after we're born, our eyes undergo quite a lot of significant changes. the changes in the eyes, particularly, in the front part of the eye and as the eye grows, it continues until the late teenage years, but the most dramatic changes typically happen within the first couple of years of life. And then the, I guess, rate of change or progression sort of tends to taper off or slow down as we get a little bit older. And there's been a lot of research conducted in animal models as well as in humans, and we know that eye growth is a visually guided and locally mediated process, meaning that what the eye sees, what the eye experiences during childhood is going to influence how it grows. So this is a simple cross-sectional image of the eye, just to familiarize yourself with some of the components that I'm going to be talking to you about today. You've got in the front part of the eye, the clear window or tissue, which we call the cornea. And then behind that, we've got the pupil, which is sort of that black hole. And then we've got the crystalline lens that sits right behind it. So the cornea and the crystalline lens, they provide optical power to the eye so that when light rays enter it, it bends the light to hopefully focus on the retina. If it focuses on the retina, then we're going to see a clear image. And as you're probably already aware, retina is that sensory tissue at the back of the eye that picks up or detects the light image and converts it into visual signals, which is then transferred down to our brain so that we're able to perceive it and be able to see the image. So as I mentioned to you earlier, the biggest changes in eye growth happen during the first couple of years of life. And this is a really nice animation to sort of show you the changes that happens. So during the first couple of years, you can see that there's quite a lot of big changes. And then until about 18 years of age, which is when our physical growth starts to stop as well, we find that the eye growth starts to sort of stop too. So a lot of the big changes happen in the front part of the eye, the lens of the eye, and you can see that the eye itself is growing, it's expanding. So the cornea tends to flatten a little bit. The lens also tends to get a little bit thinner and flatter. And the overall length of the eye tends to increase as we get older. So the most dramatic changes, first couple of years of life, and then probably up to 6 or so years. And then it sort of continues until the late teenage years. So the whole point of emmetropization, which is sort of this growth process that's been shown on this video, is that the idea is that the optical components of the eye, which is the cornea and the lens, the aim of it is that the light rays entering the eye, the cornea and the lens matches with the length of the eye, so that when light rays come in, the eye length is matched so that when the light comes in, it bends on the retina. Because if it reaches the retina, then the image that we will see will be clear. So that is what we term as emmetropia. So emmetropia is a refractive state. It's the ideal point of eye growth where we have the image being clearly formed on the retina. And that is sort of the aim of the overall eye growth process. However, there are instances when light entering the eye unfortunately focuses either behind or in front of the retina, and that is what we term as refractive error. And so the two main types of refractive error are myopia and hyperopia. So with myopia, as you can see in this image here, you have I don't know if I can get rid of this. Okay. You have the light rays coming in, and the optical power of the lens and the cornea are too strong. So it causes the light rays to bend too quickly. And so the image actually gets formed in front of the retina. And what results on the retina is a blurred image. So when you're myopic, like myself, and you can see that I'm wearing glasses, the type of correction we have is a negative lens. So what the lens does is when light enters, it actually diverges the rays out, and then to a point where the light rays entering the eye will then focus on the retina. The opposite happens with hyperopia, where the light rays actually don't bend fast enough, so it actually focuses behind the retina. And then we need a plus lens to then help bend the rays a little bit faster or bend the rays a little bit more so that it actually focuses on the retina. So myopia is typically develops during childhood. We see onset usually around the 6 to 8 years of age. And unfortunately, once you develop myopia, it doesn't disappear and it tends to progress. It progresses until usually late teenage years when that emmetropization or the eye growth process that I mentioned to you earlier, until that process tends to finish off. Now, in the past, even about probably 15, 20 years ago, the way that we managed myopia was to simply correct the blur. So, trying to get that image to focus on the retina. So we would typically prescribe glasses or contact lenses to correct the optical blur with myopia. And we didn't worry too much about the fact that myopia was progressing. It was always the high myopes, people with high degrees of myopia, where we tended to associate them as having potential risks of developing ocular pathologies. So that was what happened in the past, but with more research and understanding of the condition, we started to realize that, myopia, it's not just high myopes, it's anyone with any degree of myopia, unfortunately, that have an increased risk of developing various eye conditions that are at risk of irreversible visual impairment or blindness. Some conditions include things like retinal pathologies or degenerations, including retinal detachment, glaucoma, myopic maculopathy. There's a lot of, unfortunately, some serious eye conditions that result in irreversible blindness that a myope is at a higher risk of developing. Higher the degree of myopia does equal to more risk. And not only are the ocular health implications significant, there are also some financial and social implications of myopia that we also need to remember. It costs money to be able to get correction for myopia, to be able to manage any of these ocular health issues that might develop from myopia, and social implications as well. It can have impacts, for example, if you don't have good vision in a child, their academic performance, wearing glasses and how the child perceives themselves, quality of life. There are unfortunately detrimental impacts of having myopia. So the current management, understanding that it's not only just it's the optical blur that happens with myopia, but also understanding that there are ocular health implications, financial and social implications. The current management is not only to correct the blur, but we want to try to stop it from progressing, to slow it down, to try to control it so that we can minimize these other consequences as much as possible. Now, this was a graph I think that Lisa showed last presentation as well, but it's a very important graph to show you what's happening around the world and what's predicted to happen. The prevalence of myopia is increasing worldwide, and you can see from this graph here that the number of myopes, which are in the year 2000 are sort of that dark black bars, and what's predicted to happen by 2050. And that's only about 25 years away. So you can see the dramatic increases in the prevalence of myopia and how that's sort of then starting to infiltrate or go into the older age groups, as we see more and more young children developing myopia and sort of the current myopes becoming older in age as well. So by 2050, it's estimated that about 5 billion individuals in the world are going to have myopia. Now, there are regional differences. So the prevalence of myopia, particularly in East Asia, is very high. Australia has probably one of the lower rates of myopia compared to some other countries. But what we're finding globally is that it is increasing in prevalence, and it poses some huge public health issues because of the ocular health implications that are associated with myopia. So I'm not sure if you have your phones with you, but I just wanted to sort of try to keep this a little bit interactive. But if you just want to scan the QR code, I just thought it'd be interesting to see how many of you here in this presentation today are myopic. I might just give a couple of minutes just to see if there's anyone who, if you're able to do the poll. I've got 3 people so far. I'm myopic too. Okay. Oh, it's even. Oh, sorry, there's a bit of a typo. I wrote NHO. All right, so as you can see here, we've got a few people who've participated, but it seems like we've got 60% of the people here right now being myopic. It's changing around a little bit, but the majority have myopia. So it's very common. And as I mentioned from the previous slides, all the potential issues that can rise from myopia, it's becoming a huge public health issue that is starting to attract more attention, from the government, for example, to implement policies to try to help manage this condition. Just another quick question, for those of you who are myopic, were you offered any treatment to maybe slow down the progression of your myopia? So I'm assuming the people here today are going to be about 20 years or so and older. So it'd be interesting just to see, when you were prescribed glasses, were you just given glasses to correct your blur, or did you get any advice on maybe potentially trying to slow down the progression of your myopia? So it seems here, unfortunately, no one here was offered any treatment to slow down their myopia. So this sort of is reflecting the real big shift in our clinical management. So when we all went and got our eyes tested when we were children, the management was just to give you your glasses, make sure you have clear vision. Now, when we see a child in clinical practice, the way that we manage children is not only do we give them glasses so that they can see clearly or any type of optical correction, we now have to also provide them an option to potentially slow or stop the progression of myopia. As I mentioned earlier, once a child develops myopia, they will continue to progress until they are in their late teenage years. The younger you develop myopia, the longer duration of time that you're going to have that progression. So ultimately, you end up having more and more myopia by the time you reach your adulthood. And unfortunately, what we're seeing is that where a lot more younger children are starting to develop myopia. We're starting to see children who are 4 years of age starting to develop myopia, meaning that they're going to have about 15 years of their life where they're going to have this ongoing progression. So you can imagine how much myopia they're going to have by the time they reach adulthood. It's going to be high, and that also then increases their risk of ocular health conditions and implications. So now the management has changed. We will, so it's sort of broadly categorized into 5 treatment types. We've got the optical interventions, which is then split into contact lenses, optical glasses. We also have pharmacological treatments, behavioral modifications or interventions, and we also have red light therapy, which I won't go too much into today because this is still sort of an area which is growing, hasn't really been implemented in terms of treatment in many parts of the world. And I also believe that Lisa spoke about this last time as well. So I just wanted to more focus on the other treatment options, which are more very commonly used in clinical practice. In optical treatments, we've got spectacle lenses, soft contact lenses, and orthokeratology lenses. So the hypothesized mechanism of these different types of optical treatments is that we're pretty much changing the child's visual experience. And by doing that, we're hoping that it will slow or stop their myopia progression. And there's been a lot of clinical trials which have supported this. Now, eye growth is a visually guided process, meaning that what the child sees is going to influence how their eye grows. And there's been these very landmark studies that have shown that, for example, if you put a plus lens in front of the eye, where you're going to make the light rays converge faster, so it's going to then impose what we call a myopic defocus on the retina, what will happen to the eye is that it will actually stop growing, the tissues will thicken up, and the idea is that it's going to try to push the retina forward so that it becomes coincident with the image. On the other hand, if you have light rays that focus behind the retina, the eyes are actually going to try to grow even faster so that it can have the retina try to meet or match the image plane. So myopic defocus, which is this blue scenario here, has been shown to slow down or stop eye growth, whereas hyperopic defocus, which is this sort of the red line scenario here, has been shown to encourage or stimulate eye growth. So this has been replicated in various species of animals, and it has also been shown in humans as well. So based on that, there's been a lot of optical treatments that have been developed. So this is sort of a diagram of a spectacle lens that's currently available that we prescribe to our children, where in the center of the eye, we're going to make sure that the light rays focus on the retina so that they can see clearly. But this is a standard lens, and you can see that when you measure the light rays, it actually focuses behind the eye in the periphery. So the hypothesis is that the eyes are going to continue to grow. Despite what's happening in the center, the eyes are going to grow longer like this, where I'm showing you with my laser pointer, so that in the periphery, that image is going to meet the retina. So there's been a lot of new spectacle lenses that have been developed, and the idea is that we're going to make sure that the child has clear vision in the center by getting the light rays to focus on the retina. But then the light rays in the periphery are actually going to focus in front of the retina. And this has been shown to slow down or stop eye growth. So this myopic defocus in the periphery. And this is what has been implemented into a lot of spectacle lenses that we now prescribe to our children. So here is this lens where it's called a DIMS lens, a defocus incorporated multiple segment lens. And in the center, it's like a donut, as you can see. In the center, that's where the distance correction is. So that's where we correct for their myopia. And then in the periphery, you've got these donut or annulus of all these little small little segments that you can, that's been enlarged here. And these segments cause the light rays to converge faster to make the peripheral retina experience myopic defocus, which slows or stops eye growth. There's been clinical trials across many years to show that on average, children who wear these types of glasses compared to the standard ones that we've been using for many, many years, these glasses can actually slow or stop eye growth. Similarly, there's other designs with the same concept where you, for example, have that central clear zone where you get that clear vision, but then you've got these treatment zones in the periphery to induce that myopic retinal defocus in order to slow or stop eye growth. So this is a diagram from the paper that, or the study that did the clinical trial. And the idea is that you get this sort of bowl shape of defocus in front of the eye. And by doing that, you're hopefully stimulating signals in the eye to stop eye growth. So there's a lot of myopia control, as we term these treatments, myopia control, spectacle lenses that are currently on the market and are prescribed to children. This is just another brand or another lens design that's out by a company called Zeiss, and you can see the same sort of donut ring design that's been implemented as well. And there are other spectacle lenses, which has also been not only looking at how the defocus is sort of manipulated or changed in our vision, but there are other lenses that are also available to reduce contrast as another way to potentially generate visual signals that may slow down eye growth in children or myopia progression. But they're not commercially available just yet. So I've sort of focused on the ones that are currently prescribed in clinical practice. Same concept, we've got them implemented contact lenses. So you've got that sort of donut ring shape. So the center here provides that clear vision to correct their myopia, and the darker rings are to provide that myopic defocus in the periphery, in the hopes that it will slow or stop the child from progressing in myopia. And clinical trials have supported these designs. Orthokeratology lenses, which you may or may not be aware of, these are contact lenses that are rigid or hard, and you actually wear them while you sleep. The idea is that these contact lenses will change the corneal surface or the front surface of the eye. It changes the topography or the shape of the front surface of the eye, and by doing that, it actually corrects your myopia. So you see that there's the normal cornea here. You wear the contact lens overnight. It's almost like a mold for the eye. It creates this new corneal shape when you take the lens out, and you can actually see clearly without having to wear any glasses or contact lenses at all. So this is what the contact lenses look on the eye. And one of the sort of comparisons I make is almost like where you wear retainers for your teeth. So once you get your braces, you've got that nice new shape and you want to maintain that. So you wear these retainers for your teeth. Same thing here. You've got a contact lens that creates this nice new shape on the eye, which actually corrects your vision so that you don't need to wear anything during the day. And you need to keep wearing that contact lens every night to maintain that corrective shape. So these lenses as well had been found to, these lenses were developed not to, as a way to slow down myopia progression. They were actually as just an alternative form of correction for adults. But what they found was that the new shape of the front surface of the eye that I showed you in the previous slide, it actually caused these visual changes where the person experienced myopic defocus in the periphery of their vision. And so these lenses then started to be prescribed to children as a way to control or slow down their myopia progression. And it's been shown in multiple clinical trials to have this positive effect. And it also has the added benefit where the child actually doesn't need to wear any visual correction during the day. They can do that all at night. And the last group of, another group of treatments, just quickly going through, is pharmacological treatments. The most common one that we use is atropine. You've probably heard of atropine, used in medicine. In the eye, we use it more for diagnostic purposes initially. Back, many, many years ago, they were called the belladonna drops. So women used to put them in the eyes to dilate their pupils because they thought that it would give them a more seductive look a little bit more attractive. But obviously the application of these drops have changed quite dramatically, and they have, various side effects in the eyes. Initially, we prescribed atropine for myopic children because of the visual changes that it caused. But the more we understand about these eye drops, we think that these atropine drops are actually causing some biochemical changes in the retina that might be impacting how the eye grows, and in that effect, slowing down myopia progression. Now, atropine, depending on which part of the world you come from, in some places it's commercially available and some it's not. We used to prescribe very high concentrations, going from 0.1 to 1% atropine. These drops are potent. They're really, really strong. When you put them in the eyes, your pupil dilates. You can't really read up at close. It's the side effects of these eye drops. But when we started to look at really low concentrations from 0.01 to 0.05%, we started to understand that these very low concentrations had very minimal or reduced side effects, but they also had the benefit of slowing down myopia progression in children. And there's been clinical trials done across many parts of the world, across hundreds of children, that have shown that using atropine has been quite beneficial. Now, just as a comment in regards to the clinical trials, clinical trials are very expensive and takes a long time to conduct. So a lot of these treatments have been typically investigated on a 2 to 3 year period, but we do need to understand sort of the longer term treatment effects, which is now increasingly being investigated. But all of these treatments that I've just spoken to you about are increasingly prescribed in clinical practice all over the world. Now, I've sort of talked about a lot of the treatments, and how we select these treatments is based on various risk factors. So for a child who is myopic, there's various factors which increases their risk of developing myopia. So for example, if you have a family history, so if your mum or your dad is myopic, then it's more likely that the child will develop myopia. Younger the age that you get myopia, unfortunately, the higher the risk of, greater progression, higher severity of myopia. Gender, we find that some girls tend to unfortunately have more myopia. Ethnicity, children or individuals from particularly in Asia have a higher risk. The age of onset is on there twice, that shouldn't be. And also what their vision is and their eye length is when we see them can also have a risk. So if you have a longer eye to begin with, then you have a risk of the eye growing faster as well. Now, I guess the more important points that are more relevant to this talk is about how much time you spend outdoors and what your visual experience is, which we term as near vision behavior. So these are more modifiable risk factors for myopia because we can make recommendations to hopefully change the child's exposure to these risk factors. So outdoor light exposure, spending time outside in the bright sun, there's been a lot of studies to investigate the influence of that on eye growth, and it's been found to be protective against developing myopia. There have been some sort of, I guess, contradictory sort of results from different studies in regards to how it influences or the impact of outdoor exposure when you already have myopia. Some studies found that outdoor light exposure has no impact once you've developed myopia. Others have found that it can slow down the progression. But the, I guess, general understanding is that it at least has a definite protective effect from what we understand at the moment against the development of myopia. And we don't exactly understand why. It could be the very high lighting conditions, which causes sort of biochemical changes in the eye, for example, dopamine release. It can also be due to the visual experience when you're outside. So typically when you're outside, you have sort of less variation. Everything sort of typically is more further away compared to if you're in like an office or computer setting. And some have also suggested that potential increases in vitamin D levels as well might play a role, but we don't exactly understand what it is, but we do know that it does have this positive effect against myopia. There are also other benefits of outdoor light exposure. Not only does it seem to protect against you developing myopia, we do find that then children will have more increased physical activity from being outside, social and developmental benefits, which can also then turn into some academic benefits as well. So we try to encourage our children, particularly our myopic children, irrespective of whether or not they already have myopia, we try to encourage them to spend as much outdoor time as possible because of the benefits. Now, a lot of the questions that we get asked is, how much time or like how often should I be outside for? And there's various characteristics about the light exposure that may matter in terms of how the eye responds. So how often we're exposed to bright light and, how long those exposures are. And is it just one time we're outside for 1 hour, or is it every 10 minutes, throughout the day? So there is increasing research to understand how these temporal characteristics of outdoor light exposure might influence eye growth. But it seems to be that the effect is cumulative. So, a child doesn't need to spend this one block of time outside to have these positive effects. They can have sort of more shorter bursts that will accumulate into sort of having an overall benefit. Other aspects about the light door exposure, which we are still trying to understand, but, the impact of the spectral composition of light, how bright does the light need to be for us to have this benefit? And also what we found in sort of studies, there was one that was done here in Australia, and it was found that, greater light exposure was associated with less eye growth in over an 18-month period. So that sort of then has been quite pivotal in how we understand, I guess, outdoor or visual behavior in children and how we manage it. So this was done by Professor Scott Reed up in Queensland in Australia, looking at children, and what they found was that children who were habitually exposed to low light levels were at greater risk of developing myopia. So if you're always in low lighting conditions, then unfortunately you had a higher risk. And what they found was that it was that 60-minute time was the threshold from the cohort of children that they had investigated, that if you had less than 60 minutes of outdoor time per day, that was a significant risk factor for very rapid eye growth or myopia progression. So then this then has led to, as our understanding of the benefits of outdoor time exposure on eye growth, myopia development, this has led to these large interventional studies being conducted in Asia, where they have done studies through schools where they try to increase how much time, outdoor time, a child is exposed to by anywhere, like the studies have ranged from between 40 to 80 minutes. And what they found was it actually had an impact, a benefit, that there was less incidence of myopia in children who had that increased outdoor light exposure compared to those who didn't. And there was one study that did find that it also seemed to have a benefit benefit for those children who were already myopic in terms of slowing down their myopic progression as well. So currently, when we see myopic children, we prescribe them one of the treatment options that I spoke to you about earlier, but we always then add on these behavioral modifications. We have to recommend children to spend at least 2 hours of outdoor light exposure per day. And it doesn't have to be in one block. It can be across multiple exposures. I explain to parents, think about, you walking to school, they have lunch, recess, coming back from after school. So you can add all those times up. So it might be maybe an extra 30 minutes that the child needs to have this outdoor exposure to receive the benefit. Now, in Australia, particularly, the sun exposure during summer as well, it can be extremely strong. So we've got a very strong culture of making sure we have, UV protection, where, children, they're encouraged to wear hats in schools. It's like no hat, no play. So one of the questions we also always get asked is, can the child still be outside and wear sunglasses, for example, and wear a hat, because it's going to reduce the brightness of the outdoor light that they experience? And the answer is yes, they still can, which is great, because even with these UV protection, what you find is that the light exposure that they experience is always still going to be higher than what they experience indoors. So wear your UV protection, but stay outside and you can still receive the benefits, which is good. As our understanding of having these protective effect of outdoor exposure, there have been some campaigns, government-run campaigns in Asia, where they have tried to collaborate with schools to encourage children to spend more time outdoors, and promoting more outdoor play. So these are sort of some couple of examples that has of past campaigns. There has also been one, China is one of the countries where we've seen one of the highest prevalences of myopia as well. So the government obviously has tried to implement as many sort of policies or initiatives to really try to combat myopia. And they had these national plans where they're trying to encourage outdoor time or activity for children and limiting time on screens. And they sort of started to continue. They had that back in 2018. And they've updated their guidelines just last year to make sure that the children have breaks from near viewing, having outdoor time to try to, be as protective against myopia development and progression. Another interesting observation that we make, which sort of supports the protective element of outdoor time, is that we see seasonal variations in myopia progression. So when we monitor children who are myopic, we find that they progress more or faster during winter periods than compared to summer. And it's the reason we believe that this is the case is that during winter, you've got shorter days, there's less light exposure compared to summer, where we tend to spend more time outdoors. And so we get that brighter illumination exposure. So this sort of then also then supports, the protective element of outdoor time. Now, a lot of our understanding of outdoor light exposure and eye growth in children earlier studies were based on subjective measures. So we used to have questionnaires asking parents, on average, how much time did your child spend outdoors, questions along those lines. But the problem with subjective questionnaires is that it's based on what the parents can remember. So there's recall bias, and there's also what we call a social desirability bias, which is when you want to look more favorable to the other person. So you might then just round up a little bit the amount of time that you spent outdoors, just so that you can seem to be a little bit more favorable to the investigator. So that was, I guess, one of the main limitations of how we measured the outdoor light exposure in children. And more recently, we've been able to get these wearable sensors to be able to objectively measure what the child's outdoor light exposure is. And I've got a few examples here. On the left-hand side, this is called a hobo. It's a pendant-like device that can capture real-time outdoor and indoor light measures, as well as how long they've been in those conditions. On the right-hand side, this is the Active Watch. So it's sort of, we wear them as on our wrists as a watch, and it measures light exposure, physical activity, as well as sleep duration as well. Now, we have more recently been getting access to these other wearable devices that we actually wear on spectacle frames. So the idea is that because it's more on level with the eye than, you know, for example, on the wrist, that it might be able to take more accurate measurements of what the eye is actually experiencing. And this on the left-hand side is called the behaviour, which is a device from Europe. And that's able to measure lighting conditions, but it is also able to detect and measure when we hold things up at close. So for example, whether it's a computer screen, a book, a phone, it's able to pick that up and say, how long have we been looking at that object, and for how far away as well. On the right-hand side, this is another device called the Cloud Clip, and similarly, it's able to measure lighting conditions, as well as detect the distance, as well as the duration of any near activities. So the devices have sort of evolved for us to be able to understand not only lighting conditions, but also the child or the person's visual behavior. So near viewing behavior, it's a term that we use to describe the duration, the distance, the intervals, and the viewing angles of any sort of near work that we do. Excuse me. Similar to time spent outdoors, when we ask parents about, oh, how much time does your child, you know, read for? It was all collected based on questionnaires, which have those biases. So, excuse me. So more recently, with access to these objective wearable sensors, we're able to measure not only, you know, the lighting conditions that a child is exposed to, but we're also able to understand how long are they actually reading for, how close are they holding, you know, their books, their phones, you know, laptops, whatever it might be. So this has been a big game changer for us to be able to really understand in real time what a child is doing. So the current evidence based on near work and myopia is a little bit mixed. I'm sure many of you have probably heard things like, you know, don't hold things too close to the eyes. It's bad for the eyes. You can't, you know, watch TV for too long, or you can't be on the computer for too long, or your phone, because it's bad for your eyes. But currently our sort of the evidence is a little bit mixed in terms of, is there actually an association between how much near work you do and your short-sightedness or myopia. But of those studies that have found that there is a possible link, they found that children who spend longer duration and hold things in closer were at a higher risk of myopia development. And that's where we come to this rule, which you may have heard of, called the 20-20-20 rule. So this is more, I guess, to help with computer use, you know, in adults, but then now it's sort of streamed down to children as well, where the idea is that you take a 20-second break while looking at a distance of 20 feet or more. So this is like, you know, 6 meters or more away. And you do this every 20 minutes. And by hopefully doing that, you're going to give your eyes a bit of a break and be able to then reduce maybe the risk of you developing myopia, because of those studies that have found a link between near work and myopia. It's sort of the more intense, sort of closer, long durations that seems to be the mitigating factors. However, at the moment, you know, we're still trying to really understand if there is a link, and these objective wearable devices will be able to hopefully help us answer some of those questions. So I guess then another common question we get asked about a lot is, and what about screen time? So obviously there's an increase in use in devices, whether it's for personal reasons, everyone has a smartphone, and in schools as well. A lot of schools are increasingly using digital devices, computer screens, exams, for example, at universities are now, at least at UNSW, a lot of exams are done now online on a computer. And so what's the impact of this on a child's eye growth? One suggestion or one hypothesis is that, when you're on a computer or when you're on a digital screen, does it change your visual behavior in that do you tend to hold things a little bit closer, and do you tend to conduct or use the phone for longer periods of time? So it's not really that the screen itself might be a risk factor, it's the behavior that it entices or induces. So for example, I have had times when I've been on my phone, I've been scrolling through, and by the time I know it, it's already been half an hour that it has passed without me even realizing that much time had gone by. So is it that sort of behavior that might then put that person or a child at risk of myopia development? And then we look at COVID-19 and what happened with myopia. So during COVID-19, there were lockdown periods where people could not go outside, or a lot of education went inside, or it was at home, and people were not allowed outside in some parts of the world. And there were a lot of behavioral and environmental changes that children underwent during those lockdown periods. Increased screen time, very little outdoor time, so not a lot of outdoor exposure, light exposure. And of those studies that looked in these regions, they found that during these lockdown periods that there were increases in myopia, I guess then further supporting how our visual experience, lighting conditions, has an impact on how a child's eye grows. So there's the two key papers that have been recently published looking at the impact of screen time and myopia. The first one at the top here was looking at over 100,000 participants, and they found that screen time was associated, or high screen time was associated with the risk of developing myopia. And it was screen time related to TVs and computer screens, while not from smartphones, which is quite interesting. The second study or the meta-analysis down here, this included over 300,000 participants, and they tried to look at the impact of daily screen time and myopia. And what they found was that the odds of higher odds of myopia was particularly high when you had between 1 to 4 hours of screen exposure. So what the investigators proposed was that maybe 1 hour or less is okay, but anything more than that, then you're going to have that higher risk of myopia. However, in saying that, it's, with I guess, our lives these days, to have less than 1 hour of screen time may be difficult, but this is sort of what the studies have found. There's been guidelines that have been developed from different groups or government groups. So the American Academy of Pediatrics and the Australian Department of Health. This is sort of the recommendations where they make, so under 2 years, no screen time. Until you're 5 years of age, maybe 1 hour of screen time. And the reason is because they don't want more than 1 hour of inactivity in a child, because that may impact their physical, like motor development. This one is a key sort of table from a study that was conducted in Australia, in Sydney actually a few years ago, called the Sydney Myopia Study, where they were trying to investigate the impact of how much near work you do and the lighting conditions. So these are one of the few studies that have actually looked at these two together. And what they found was that children who had low outdoor and high near work activity had a much higher risk or odds of myopia. So the lighting conditions as well as the near working conditions sort of almost were compounding on top of each other in terms of the risk for myopia. So at the moment, our recommendation to our kids is that you want to spend at least 2 hours of outdoor light exposure or outdoor time. And then when you're doing any near work, whether it's using screens or whatever it might be, that you do need to try to hold it far away, and also making sure that you take regular breaks. And I'm going to wrap this up soon because I know I've gone a little bit over time. Now, in my group, at the myopia research group here at UNSW, we've been trying to monitor children who are already undergoing myopia control treatment. So all those different treatment options that I had introduced to you earlier in the lecture, we're now very interested to see, while a child is undergoing myopia control treatment, how does their behavior or their visual experience influence treatment outcomes? So a lot of the clinical trials that have investigated the different spectacles or soft contact lenses, one of the limitations in those studies is that they didn't really take into account what the child was doing. So were the child spending a lot of time outdoors or indoors, or were they, reading a lot or not reading a lot, and how those sort of risky behaviors, I guess, influence treatment outcomes? Well, we don't really know for sure at the moment. So what we're trying to do is I'm collaborating with some clinics, one up in Queensland in Australia and 3 clinics in the US, to monitor children who are undergoing treatment for myopia control through those new optical lens designs, where we're trying to slow or stop their progression, but also monitor what they're actually doing and seeing if, whether the amount of time they spend outdoors or whether the amount of time they spend on computer work, for example, if that has any impact on the treatment outcomes. And so hopefully in a year or 2 time, I'll be able to come back and share with you if a child's behavior does have any influence on the treatment effect. And with that, I'll just wrap up. I'd like to thank my research group, particularly Samrat and Rebecca, as well as my collaborators in the US and in Australia, who've been helping me conduct the study to be able to understand child's visual behavior, lighting conditions on their eye growth.